Well, hi, boys and girls, and welcome to Senior Moments. My name is Tommy Ellison. Those of you who know me, and for those of you who don't know me, well, my name is Tommy Ellison. And today is kind of a special episode for me. And by the way, I'm sorry about last week. I had the opportunity to see the Harlem Globetrotters in Huntsville that played at 3 o'clock, and so we actually didn't get out of that menagerie of basketball playing till around 5. So as that was the reason for the pre-recorded episode on Half Rubber, which went back to the very beginning of all these. And this is episode 42. And excuse me, I need a mute button, don't I? I'm going to take a quick sip of the Gatorade here. And back to my story. About, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, I was asked by Deborah Adams Hewlett, who is our president of our alumni group for Fairfield High School, to perhaps do a presentation on my family, which is a kind of an ongoing theme that she's been using. And so I said I would be glad to, but I'm going to probably focus on my grandfather, the man that we called Pop. And that presentation was actually a slide presentation. And so I've been asked by several people that missed it that day, along with some others that know a little bit about my grandfather, if I would mind doing it again. So I thought I would take this opportunity here this afternoon to kind of show you somewhat abbreviated version, because there are a lot of photographs that I showed in the back end of the presentation there at the alumni meeting that really were not necessarily germane to the message. But what I've done, in case you're interested in seeing those, I have compiled those into a separate video, and I will have a link to that file in the description when I post this one on YouTube and also on the Facebook post. So if you want to see the remainder of the many pictures that my grandfather brought back from this destination that we're going to talk about in just a moment, then you'll have the opportunity to do that if you're interested. And if not, you can, use it or lose it, as they sometimes say. So this episode 42 about Pop is not a replay. It's live, and we're going to talk a little bit about my grandfather, who was like the star of the show in this particular presentation that I did for the alumni group. And here's kind of how it worked. My grandfather, if you didn't know him, his name was Steve Estock. He was a Marine, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But the title of this presentation at the alumni group was 1910 China, a young Marine's adventure in the Forbidden City. And so we'll get started here. That's not what I wanted to do. Okay, next slide is what I want. There we go. All right. And again, this presentation was done by me at the alumni meeting, so we'll get all that out of the way here. Here's the deal. My grandfather, Steve Estock was his name. He was born in August of 1888 in a little area called Damasa, which was in the Austria-Hungary region of Europe. Sometimes it was referred to as Slovakia. And, again, one of these Balkan areas, the political lines and the boundaries, the geopolitical boundaries tended to change quite frequently back then as different little provinces and regions tried to usurp their authority and create boundary lines. So he always said that he was born in Austria, and he in researching this, it was really so close to the line that it could have been either way. He was married June 16th, 1914, in the St. Anthony's Catholic Church in Inslee, where my mother or grandmother and my mother, for that matter, were members. And he was buried in 1971. December the 1st of 1971 was actually his date of death there in Fairfield. And that shot that you see of him in the photograph there was him in his Marine uniform. And I'm not really sure if that was made during this Chinese part of the component or if it was later on, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that as well. So, by the way, my grandmother, her maiden name was Kurtz, Mary Kurtz, but upon marrying my granddad, she became Mary Kurtz Estock, and there's a number of Kurtz that were over in the Fairfield, Inslee, Wylam area. She, believe it or not, was actually born in the same general region of Austria-Hungary in a little town called Brezno. Again, they're in that Slovakian region. And she died in October of 1974. That's a very old and very young grandmother picture there. You'll notice at the bottom it says Marye Curie. That was the name that she used when she came across Ellis Island, but whoever was registering families there probably was having a long day, and so in essence of creating an easier name to spell, she was actually listed in the records there at Ellis Island as Mary Kurtz, but her given name was Marye Curie. We will continue. That's the map of this Austria-Hungary region. And Grandpa, like I said, was born in that Slovakian region in that part of the country. And you can kind of see overlaid some of the current names of cities and countries that are there now. But in general, that yellow region was the region of Austria-Hungary back in the late 1800s. So again, we're going to get away from the history lesson. My grandmother was actually born in the same region, and that little town, again, had some ties, but they did not know one another. In fact, you'll understand why in just a moment. Speaking of which, Ellis Island and all, when the Estock side of the family came through, their actual name was Estock, I-S-T-O-K, but again, at Ellis Island, it got changed to Estock. So that was where they came from. The Kurtz family, my grandmother's family, actually immigrated in March of 1889, and they came to this country on a German steamship called the Elbe. Now, if you remember the movie Titanic, if you remember, there were several different classes of transportation. They did not come across in the upper luxury division of the steamship, but instead were actually in the steerage part of the ship, which kind of looks like that red area there down in the bottom that you can see. And it was probably, I think it was about 8 or 9 days, very hot, a lot of folks getting seasick, and it was a kind of a bad situation for them as they traveled across the Atlantic to America. And just little, and this is not meant to be political, but just a little factoid that between 1820 and 1920, over 30 million immigrants legally came to America. So 30 million over a 100-year period. And I could say something about our southern border, but I'm not going there because I said it wasn't going to be political. But in kind of an interesting twist of events, in 1898, the Elbe was sunk by ramming into another steamship I say they rammed, they were hit by it, and actually the ship was so badly damaged that it sank. But look at this survivor count, just to give you an idea of what sailing was like back then. 4 of the 49 Ceylon passengers survived. Those are the guys on the upper deck, the high-priced spread, so to speak. 1 of the 151 steerage passengers survived. And 15 of a crew of 155 also survived that wreck at sea. And kind of amazing, but that was the ship that my grandmother and her family actually came across the ocean on to be in this great country that we live in. My grandfather, just a little bit of trivia here, his family immigrated when he was 18 months old. Now, that doesn't really tell the whole story because being that he was only a year and a half old, he did not travel with them across the ocean and through Ellis Island with his family, because their intent was to come to this country, find work, find a place to live, set up shop, and then they wrote a note back to family members there in Austria-Hungary and told them if they would find a family that was coming to the USA and let their, at the time, 18-month-old son come across with them. And by the time they got to the U.S. and got all that kind of squared away and wrote the letter, and the letter got to Europe, and the letter was read by the family, the little guy was 2 years old. And so he actually came in to the country not as a stowaway, but posing, how does a 2-year-old pose? The family represented him as their child. And of course, they reunited and in the kind of the Newark, New Jersey area, and he was passed off to his real Estock family at that point in time. And that's where he grew up, in the Newark, in the New Jersey area. He was a bit of a ruffian, and he had, from what I've told by family and his wife Marye, that he had a lot of run-ins with the law. Now, at this point in time, Marye and Steve did not know one another. They were in separate parts of the world, or the U.S., and so sometime after he came across and got a little older, got a little wiser, got a little meaner, he moved to Chicago along with some family to work on the Great Northwestern Railroad. And while he was working there, he stole a bag of sugar off of a freight car, and sugar was a pretty valuable commodity back then. And so he got caught, and he had to go to see the judge, and the judge gave him 2 choices. He said, you can either go to prison, probably juvenile detention, or you can join the military. And so he decided that the military sounded like a better option than prison, and so he went and joined the Marines. And he even had to lie about his age, because I think he was a little underage to join the Marines, but that's what he did, and that's how he got in. And all because of that bag of sugar that he stole. So he chose the military service over reform school and joined the Marine Corps in April 24th, 1908. That was his enlistment papers that were giving us that information. And in August of 1908, which is what, August 4 to 8, so about 4 months later, he was actually deployed to China with a Marine outfit that was part of a legation force. In other words, a group of guys that were there along with some other countries' servicemen to protect the Empress Dowager, who the country was in a lot of turmoil, and the Boxer Rebellion that went on just prior to this time frame was still kind of in an uproar, and the rebellion was put down, but there was still that rebel undercurrent that was going on. And so I may be getting a little ahead of myself, but the Empress Dowager that was reigning over China at that time actually paid several countries to have their military there to protect the royal family there in Peking. So, again, my granddad was there in Peking from 1908 to 1910. He also, on his way back from China in 1910, served in the Philippines for 1 year, and then he was discharged in 1911. And his total pay for that several years of service was $246. I guess they gave it to him in back pay and said, don't spend it all in one place. So, in addition to all that, we have a little bit more information. Shortly after his coming back to the U.S., he moved to Birmingham, and that was where he met my grandmother, by the way. And they married, had 2 sons, Steve Jr. and Eddie. And then right at the tail end of World War I, he re-enlisted back with the Marines in 1917 and was immediately deployed to Guantanamo Bay down near Cuba. And then eventually in 1918, he was deployed to France in 1918, as I said. And so he was serving with the American Expeditionary Forces for a 2-year period, and that was in France. Now, the war was pretty much winding down by then, and his job there in the military in France was working in a recreational kind of activity. He was running, I guess, what you would call the rec center for the military, recruits and soldiers that were stationed there in France. And just a little bit of minutia, just believe it or not, but it's true. I verified it. He recruited and trained a gentleman by the name of Gene Tooney to represent the Marines in an armed forces boxing tournament in Europe. And this was a big deal. All of the best boxers kind of came together for a big, giant, European championship of military fighters. And Gene Tooney was who my grandfather trained, and ultimately Gene Tooney won the military title there in Europe as the best boxer, and came back to the U.S. and returned home to defeat Joe Louis twice. In fact, you can kind of get an idea of where we are here. Tooney had 85 fights. He had 80 wins, 1 loss. 48 of his wins were by knockout. There were 0 wins by decision. Well, actually, there was 1. There were 32 by decision and 1 loss by decision. I guess that was the one he lost. And then there were 3 draws, and there was 1 no contest, and I'm not sure what that means. And as you can see, the U.S. Postal Service actually, during his time as being a world champion, actually put his face on a postage stamp for his role in winning that fight. So anyway, that's just a little bit of the minutia about my granddad, his training of Gene in the Marines, and becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. So after he was discharged, he returned to Fairfield. He fathered 8 more kids, good Catholic family. And He retired from Tennessee Coal and Iron after 44 years of service there working at the Fairfield Mills. And he was actually the first safety director at the Fairfield TCI Mills. Now, the 7 of the 10 kids that he had actually worked for TCI and what became U.S. Steel at various times. In fact, my mom even worked there, not in the mill itself, but in the TCI credit union that she made a career and eventually went to work for Mutual Savings Credit Union there in Fairfield. Again, a little more minutia. Pop, I remember him well because I spent a lot of time there with him and Grandma when I was out of school for the summer, and because my mother worked, after school was always where I spent my hours until she came and picked me up and took me home. And I can remember he smoked Prince Albert pipe tobacco. In fact, many a time he sent me down to Jimmy's Bicycle Shop there in Fairfield. Those of you may remember that, next to Puckett's, and to buy a Prince Albert in the can. And I'm not going there with the joke. So he also always seemed like carried a pack of Wrigley's Spearmint gum for the grandkids. And I kind of got a feeling that he used it for himself to cover up the pipe tobacco taste, maybe when he was trying to chase Grandma around the kitchen. 10 kids, right? So he also, and believe it or not, founded the first fire department in Fairfield. And as a matter of fact, several of his oldest sons would actually sleep with him in the fire hall. And I used to wonder about why they did that, but I finally dawned on me that in the fire hall, they had beds that the firemen could sleep in, during the night. But when you have 10 kids in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, chances are they took great luxury in being able to sleep in the fire hall as opposed to at home with all the youngins. So my grandfather died of a stroke on December 1st, 1971, as I mentioned earlier. And this is an old photograph of my Estock family. This is Big Steve sitting on the couch there. This is my grandmother. Where'd she go? Where's Grandma? There she is, right there. And that's my mom, Anna Louise, all of her brothers and sisters. There's like 4 cousins here at this point in time in this picture. My cousin Chuck was the oldest of the grandchildren. My Aunt Mary Agnes is actually holding Erin, who is the second oldest. And then you can just barely see the top of his head, but this was my cousin Lee, who his name was Lee Johnson. He was actually married to Olin Johnson, who was the husband of Mildred Johnson. And my Aunt Patsy Sue, who was the youngest of the Estock kids, that's her. And believe it or not, she is holding me, a newborn young'un there. And anyway, that's one of the only pictures. There were two brothers that were not pictured that I stuck in the little inset there with Bobby and Bill and some of their family. So makes a total of 10 that came out of that Estock clan. So here's another little bit of minutia. I look back in the legacy of Fairfield High School graduates, and every one of the Estock kids graduated from Fairfield High School, and there they are, all the way from the class of 33, which was Steve Jr., the senior son of Steve Sr. Estock, all the way down to Patsy Sue at the very bottom of the list, who graduated in the class of 56. And I just thought that was unusual. It was a very small town, Fairfield, if you're not familiar with it. Everybody knew everybody. But all 10 of those Estock children graduated from Fairfield High School. Believe it or not, that fertility that was evident in the first generation here of sons and daughters continued on, and there was a whole slew of grandchildren that were produced. But believe it or not, and this is what kind of surprised me, I was the only one of the 24 grandchildren who actually graduated from Fairfield, and that was in my class of 69. So anyway, it doesn't mean anything to probably anybody, but I'm proud to be the only legacy member of the grandchildren of this marvelous family that I had the privilege of being associated with. Just got a little note here from my sister, who was one of these grandchildren. She said, I was just telling Seth that all I really remember about him, that being Steve, I guess, is that he was always lying on the couch watching TV, smoking his pipe. I also remembered being fascinated by the popsicle stick lamp he made, or at least I think he made it. I don't know that I remember the popsicle stick lamp, but he did spend a lot of time on the couch. I can remember coming home from grammar school and wanting to watch the Popeye Club, and he was always wanting to watch some Western on television, but he always let me watch the Popeye Club and watch the Popeye cartoons. And I always thought, I kind of had to be insistent, and he kind of got bored. But anyway, he let me have my way with the television while I was there, and I thought that was kind of cool. But let's talk about China for a little bit. The Boxer Rebellion, am I already 27 minutes? I got to go here because I know everybody's wanting to watch the Super Bowl. Not. Anyway, the Boxer Rebellion in China was actually an uprising that occurred sometime between 1899 and 1901. And so this was a large group of Chinese individuals. They were anti-foreign, anti-colonial, anything from outside of China they hated, including Christians. There were a number of priests that were actually doing missionary work in China. Many of them are buried in China. But that was the uprising, and so it was an anti-foreign movement, but it was also designed to more or less do away with the dynasty, thousands of years of rule in China by either a king or a queen, or they call the dowager. And so by 1900, there were 11 countries in this legation quarter. That was kind of like the embassies. There was the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, Italy, Spain, Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, and the United States. And there was a 55-day siege of these legation forces in what they call the legation quarter, and later called the embassies in 1900. And remember, all of these multinational forces were here to essentially protect the Empress Dowager. Why? Because they were getting paid millions of dollars by the dynasty to come in and keep the peace from the Boxer Rebellion. And there's a kind of a political cartoon. It was French in its origin. And the cartoon essentially just represented the number of countries that were ready to cut up the pie called China and take occupation. And so this Boxer Rebellion really was kind of dead set on making sure that didn't happen. So that was the kind of the backstory of why my grandfather was in China for the time that he was. But while he was there, he also managed to hook up with a photographer. And, nobody had cameras back then, but the photographers that were being paid to, I guess, document and to do their thing would sell the photographs. And interestingly enough, all of these photographs that my pop brought back from China were in a big old thick album that had really seen its wear, because he came back in the early 1900s. And by the time we found that album, it had gone through, 50 years of back and forth by not only his children, but even the older grandchildren. You'll see here there's a postcard that's actually postmarked from Peking about that time. And if I can read the fine print, it said the postcard was depicting Peking, or what we now call Beijing, and the train station there, which I'm not even going to begin to pronounce. And that train station opened in October of 1901. And this picture that you see in the bottom of the frame was actually the photograph that my grandfather had in this collection. We'll continue on. This was again another perspective of the train station, and again these were photographs that came from my grandfather's purchasing, I guess you would say, before he was pulled out of China and went to the Philippines. He actually had some photographs from the Philippines as well. Some of you who don't follow history may not know much about the Boxer Rebellion, but there was a pretty good movie actually made years later called The Sand Pebbles. Steve McQueen was in it, and it was a story of a ship, a Navy ship, that was there trying to protect the people there. And it's a good movie. You got to go see it. But the siege of the Peking that was in August of 1900 was actually a big deal. And as you can see, there was an artist rendering of a building that they called the Tower of Tartar Wall. It was part of the wall that surrounded the Forbidden City, the palace of the Empress Dowager. And if you look at these other photographs, the photograph that my grandfather brought back, you can still see the damage there in 1910 of that Tartar Wall tower. And of course, this photo on the right is the photograph of the restored wall there in China today. And got that off of Wikipedia, so Wikipedia is good for something. The Forbidden City, by the way, just again another bit of Chinese minutia. It was actually constructed from 1406 to 1420 and was the former Chinese imperial palace and the winter residence of the emperor of China from the Ming dynasty to the end of the Qing dynasty, sometime between 1420 and 1924. So, again, these photographs, all 8 by 10. As you can see, this was a photograph of the Marines, I guess, doing a little sightseeing and taking a rest. I don't know. Who knows what they were doing. One of the things that we tried to do, or I tried to do, in that photograph, if you can see, is a kind of a close-up here that I extracted from it of who I think might have been my grandfather in that photograph, because he's definitely got that look, that jaw. This is, again, the portrait that he had made that was hanging in the Estock home there in Fairfield while I was growing up. But you can see there's If that's not him, he's got a what do they call it? A doppelganger, a guy that looks like you from somewhere else. I think that's the way they say that. Anyway, this is a shot of the Marine Corps Museum in Washington, D.C., and I'll come back and visit that in just a second, because the crazy thing about it, another shot of the Marine Corps interior there in Quantico, Virginia. I guess I should say it's in the Washington area. But the deal is my cousin Jennifer was in some type of a social event in Washington. Her husband worked there in the Northern Virginia area. And she made some comments about these photographs that all of us grandchildren had been looking at over the years. It was just part of our ritual growing up to look at these photographs, and Grandpa would talk about these pictures and a little bit about what they were. I would have loved to have recorded those conversations, but so be it. But the Marines Corps had I won't say as a representative, but somebody that was at this party knew someone that was upper crust member, employee of the Marine Corps Museum. And she told them about these pictures. Well, as word got around about these photographs, the folks got in touch with Jennifer and said, "Can you show us these pictures? We'd really love to see them," because to be totally candid, we've never had any real photographic evidence of our Marines, the U.S. Marines, actually being in China during this point in time. We have some things pointing to it, but no photographic evidence. And so my mom had held on to those pictures all through the years and actually got them to Jennifer. She took them to the Marine Corps Museum and their curator to look at. And fortunately, there was this one photograph that you see here that was let's just call it the corroborating evidence, because if I go in close here, you'll notice that on the chalkboard, standing behind these guys having their pictures made, are the results of what was called an international shooting match. These were probably rifle shooting contests at different distances. And so there were two divisions. There was the officers, as you can see in that top line of the chalkboard, and then you have the enlisted men in the middle section there. And you'll notice that the British officers were, marking their scores down at different ranges, and then they got a point system going here, and so they had a total of 254, I guess, hits, maybe. I'm not sure how they were scoring that. But the Germans and the Americans were also shooting in this contest. Down in the enlisted men's section, a few more countries showed up, because you had Britain, Germany, Italians were there, the Austrians were there, not my granddad, the Austrian army, and of course the Americans. And if you'll notice, the Americans were the winners, not only in the officers division of 272 over the other two, but even the enlisted men from the American forces scored in the number one ranking there. And well, two things were obvious. One is the Americans just kicked butt when it came to shooting, and I guess they won the prize. But the other thing about this photograph that was absolutely amazing, if you get down to it, was on this chalkboard, the date of the matches, and the results was posted on June 16th, 1910. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the proof statement that Marines were actually there in China and they had something to point to that actually had a date on it that pinpointed this time frame, as it were. Pretty darn amazing. All of those photographs, by the way, have been archived in the Marine Corps Museum. They told us that if and when they choose to have a vignette or a presentation of the Marines in China, that these photographs will be used in that display. But in the meantime, they digitized all of them and sent them to family members. And all of these photographs that I'm using today are actually digital, high-resolution digital copies of the original photographs, the original 8x10s. And you can see the wear and tear as we go through. I'm going to show you a few of these, and I'm going to make this brief because there were probably 100 of these photographs, but don't worry, I'm not going to show them all. This was a photograph of a religious shrine there in China, some type of a fighting Buddha, I guess, but I'm not a student of Chinese religions. This was an assembly of the Marines there in front of one of the big halls there in the legation square. This was a church. It was actually called the Church of the Savior, and it was built in 1703, and eventually the land was requested by the emperor to be used for a park. And so they moved and rebuilt the church in its current location. That was, I'm not sure what year that was, but obviously it was before, well, it was 1887. I can't read my own notes here. The Gothic building was moved and rebuilt at its current location at the request of the emperor, who needed the original space near the Forbidden City to create a park which has a name, but I'm not going there. Zongnanhai Park, maybe. And this is a picture of the church as it exists today. Well, not today, but in 2019. You can kind of see the spires there in the old picture, the circular window above the door and the decorative doorway there. And of course, 100 or so years later, that same church is still standing, fortunately. So these guys, these were Chinese laborers who were cutting ice from the river there in Peking. And why were they cutting ice? Well, I guess, were using it to preserve food, but apparently the river froze over to the point that they could go in with these saws and cut out these blocks of ice and then haul them off to their final resting place or usage spot. And this was a shot of them cutting the ice out of the river. When I was kind of older and looking through these photographs, I always thought that this was like a candid shot of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Chinese guys, peeing in the river. But in reality, did I just say that out loud? Sorry. These are the guys that were sawing the ice. You can see the one on the far right actually holding the saw that he was using. You can see where they had actually cut into the ice to start their block cutting exercise there in the frozen river. And that had to be cold, man. That had to be gruesome, a gruesome job there. And you can see the wall that surrounded the Forbidden City. There was a rumor that went around that my dad and some of his buddies actually slipped into the Forbidden City, which was from a white-eyed American white guy that was punishable by death. So apparently they didn't get caught, or maybe the rumor wasn't true. I don't know, but it makes for good dinner conversation, I guess. So this, again, another religious shrine there. And you can go back and watch this on the replay if you want to spend more time watching these. I'm going to work my way on through them. This was a famous bridge there in that park that we mentioned a moment ago called the Jade Belt Bridge, or some people referred to it as the Moon Bridge, giving its shape. And it was located on the grounds of the Summer Palace in Beijing, but really in Peking originally, on the western shore of the Kunming Lake. I'm getting better. You got to break it down. The picture of orphans that were made, you can tell from through the years where people had tried to censor, I guess, this photograph. Maybe the young sisters and the grandchildren and all felt like this needed to be censored, so you can see where it was marked up by family members. Anyway, another religious shrine there in the area, and the mountains, but in the foreground you can see what the villages looked like outside of the Forbidden City. They lived in pretty much a state of opulence there within those walls, but the poor lived in these kind of shacks and villages, and you can understand how the Boxer Rebellion could have taken root and gotten traction by stirring up this lower class group of folks and to turn against the emperor. This was a group of the emperor's soldiers riding into the Forbidden City, or maybe out of, probably better description of it. Again, one of the photographs from Pop's collection. This is a shot of the Great Wall of China. And as you can see, there are numerous places in the wall where passageways will allow travelers to move from one side to the other. And the Great Wall, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, there's a little bit better picture. It was constructed, it's 13,000 miles of wall that were built across China. Much of what remains was built during the Ming Dynasty, and it's been standing there for more than 2 millennia. And while it was originally intended to keep out foreign invaders, a gentleman by the name of Genghis Khan in the Mongolian region decided he would demonstrate how you could get through that wall, and did so, and did much harm into the city of, or the country of China with his forces that came to bear there. And anyway, the Great Wall of China, like I said, during the Ming Dynasty from 1368 to 1644 was there, and is still there today. If you go to China, you can see. This is a kind of an interesting little video clip that I've stuck in here. This was the Tiananmen Square Rebellion in June of 1989. And this little clip was broadcast around the world when a brave student was protesting the use of the Communist China Party there. And the Tiananmen Massacre, I don't know if you can read this, was precipitated by the peaceful gathering of student workers and others in Beijing's Tiananmen Square and other Chinese cities in April of 1989. And they were calling for freedom of expression, accountability, and an end to corruption in the Chinese Communist Party. The government responded to the intensifying protest in late May of 1989. You can see the student climbing up on the tank. And on June 3rd and 4th, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, the soldiers, fired upon and killed untold numbers of peaceful protesters and bystanders. In Beijing, some citizens attacked army convoys and burned vehicles in response to the military's violence. Following the killings, the government carried out a nationwide crackdown and arrested thousands of people on charges of counter-revolution and other criminal charges, including arson and disrupting social order. And thus far, the government has never accepted any responsibility for the massacre or held any officials legally accountable for these killings. It's been unwilling to investigate the events or release data on those who were killed, injured, or forcibly disappeared or imprisoned. And Chinaman Mothers documented the details of 202 people who were killed during the suppression of the movement in Beijing and other cities. And the only reason I bring all this up, not as a political statement, or although it certainly is, but this Tiananmen Square incident was the center of attention. It was in the news cycle for many, many weeks because of the way the people were treated. But during the time that my grandfather was in China, Tiananmen Square really wasn't much of a square. It essentially was a road into the area of the city of Peking as it existed there in 1910. And you can see some statues of lions that line this dirt, muddy road that essentially was the Tiananmen Square Road as it appeared in 2010. So that's all the pictures I'm going to run for you tonight. I'm hoping that you were able to get something out of this. And my grandfather was a pretty amazing guy. And for that reason, I've always felt like I came from pretty good stock. And hopefully, if you haven't watched this live, you can catch this on the replay and get to know a little bit better. And some of you alumni folks who saw this originally will have an opportunity to kind of see it again. And as I said earlier, I will post the remainder of the photographs that were taken and brought back by my granddad in a separate video reel that we will give you links to in the descriptions when we get this thing posted. So, where do we go from here? Well, I guess I'm going to call it a night. Super Bowl started 30 minutes ago, almost 30 minutes ago. And I know everybody's dying to see the halftime show with Funny Bunny or whatever the guy's name is. Do you think it was a coincidence that he won a Grammy Award a week before the Super Bowl halftime show? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm watching Erica Kirk's alternative Super Bowl halftime event. And it's, if you don't know about it, it's being broadcast live during halftime. And it will be on the X channel for the Turning Point organization, and also Turning Point's YouTube channel will also be streaming it live as well with Kid Rock and a number of other individuals. If you don't want to watch the Super Bowl halftime show coming in from the major networks. So, with all that said, episode 42 is going to be going in the can here, and I appreciate you watching. Be sure and leave a comment if you would, and how about doing me a favor and listen carefully to this guy that's fixing to come up. He's going to give you some great advice, and he's always right, and I will appreciate you following that advice if you would. And we will see you next week for episode 43 of Senior Moments, Evidence of a Misspent Youth. You have a great weekend and have a great week coming up. God bless you all, and I love you. Take care. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.